Welcome everyone. In this video, we are going to work on To-Do List API project, which is hosted on roadmap.sh website. I will put the link in the description. In this project, we need to develop a RESTful API to allow users to manage their to-do list. The previous backend projects have only focused on CRUD operations, but this project will require to implement user authentication as well. As you can see in the figure, to-do list type in the to-do list UI, we need to send request to sign up and log into To-Do API. We are not going to build to-do list UI. We will only focus on this API part. And in the database, we have two tables, users and task. Users is to manage users, task or to do table to manage the task of the user. Let's go over the requirements quickly. First, user registration to create a new user. Then login endpoint to authenticate the user and generate a token. And then CRUD operation for managing the to-do list. We need to implement user authentication to allow only authorized users to access the to-do list. Implement error handling and security measures. Using a database to store the users and to-do list, you can use any database. Implement proper data validation, implement pagination and filtering for the to-do list. So in the previous videos, we worked on many projects, and there we have gone over the most of the items. In some videos, we have even did some authentication, but we did not do any authentication where we manually did something. We just used Spring Security and whatever is the default authentication mechanism of that. But in this video, we will only focus on authentication part. We will mainly focus on the architecture of our system. We won't focus much on the code, but I will show you code as well at the end of this video. Now let's look at the APIs which we will focus on in this video. The first is user registration. User will send some information, let's say email, password, and then we need to register the user. So here it says that after registering we need to return with a token, but we won't do that. In the registration we will only register the user. In order to get the token, we will use user login endpoint. After registering, user can use the same email and password to log in, and then we will return back with a token. And then we will look at one API to create a to-do item. And when we create to-do item, if the user is not logged in, we should just tell that you are not authorized. If the user is logged in, then we need to map that to-do to that user, so that only that user will be able to view or update that to-do. Then this is updating a to-do item and deleting get to-do items. So when we want to get to-do items, the user should be authenticated and only his to-do items should be returned back. So like these are filtering and sorting, unit tests, these are some things, but we will only focus on authentication in this video. That too, we want to go into the details of the code. I will show you the code at the end, but we will mostly focus on the architecture. So this is the Excalibur website where I will try to draw some things. So let me choose pencil here. Now let me first create the components. So one is this our user or actor, and user will directly interact with our API. We don't have any UI, so we can assume that this user is using some client, let's say Postman or curl or whatever REST client, to interact with our server. So this is our API server, and then this is our database. So we are going to use Postgres database, and this database has two tables. One is users, where we store all the users, and there is another table related to authentication, which is roles. So generally users has roles, like let's say they are user or they are admin or there is staff or something else. So users, more formally authorities. So authorities contains roles as well, and they contain some permissions as well. And then another table will be to dos, which will contain the to dos of the user. Now let's look at the registration part. So user will say that okay, I want to register with the given email and password. So we will just store that information in the database. So store new user. So we will store the users and we will assign one role, let's say user, and we will store that in the database. In case of login, first we will check whether the user exists or not with the given username and password, or given email and password. If they, so first we will verify if user exists. In that case, we will generate a token. So we will generate token. Now we need to store this token as well in the database. So in order to do that, we need another table, tokens. So this will have like token when it was created, when it will expire, and username. So which user created this token. So we will generate this token, we will return back that token to that user. Now comes the interesting part, how the user will use the token. So I will create this user again here. Now this user will make a request to our this server. Now whatever his request is, let's say he is making a post request to create a to do, and he is sending some body. For example, let's say what is its title and what is its description of the to do. Now how will our server know that who is the user? So what is his username, whether it is logged in or not. Now for that, this user will add one header in the request authorization, and its value will be bearer, and then this will be the token, and then this server will need to we need to verify whether there is an header with the token. If there is a token, then it will validate the token. So it will get the corresponding username from the database, validate token, and then this will return back with the username. If the token is present in the database, if it is not expired, and then it will return this username. Now since this API has the username, then it can store that to do in the database, and it can assign that username to the to do. So for example, for each to do in the database, we can have some field called owner, which will be the owner of the to do, and then for this field we can put username as the value. Now this part is very trivial, like how to validate the token, because we just need to do a database lookup with the token and which is not expired, and then it is also very trivial to create a to do with the username. The only thing which we need to focus on it, how do we validate the user, and how do we mark the user is authenticated for rest of the workflow. Now I will focus on that only. Now in Spring Security, basically we can create multiple filters. So you can understand them like this. So let's say this is filter 1, then this is filter 2, then there is another filter 3, and so on. So what will happen is, whenever a request comes, it goes through filter 1, then this filter 1 can modify the request and then call the next filter. Then this can also modify the request, or it can even reject the request. If it rejects the request, then request will be rejected, and what happens that the response also goes through the filter again. So this is what happens, and then this again can be, let's say there are some servlet. So servlet means the endpoint which will handle the request at the very end. For example, we create REST controller or controller. Those can be thought of as servlet. Now, so this is the flow of the request. Now any filter can reject the request. In that, let's say I have to rejected the request. In that case, the request want to go to filter 3. It will just be returned back here. Now, if you see, as you know, filters can modify the request and response both. Now, how Spring Security works is Spring Security has many filters. The most important filter is authorization filter. This is authorization filter. Now, authorization filter, if you remember, we have done some configuration where we define that for these paths we can the user does not need to be authenticated, and for these paths the user should have these roles, and for some other paths the request the user should only be authenticated, something like that. So those are taken care of in authorization filter. So authorization filters gets the user, currently logged in user, from security context holder. Security context holder. Now security context holder holds security context. So it has security context, and this security context is thread local variable. That means for different thread the value of security context will be different, and we know that in typical servlet application there is one thread per request. So you can assume that for each request we have different security context. Now this security context contains the authentication. Now authentication just means the authenticated user. So it contains multiple things. For example, principal. So principal means what is their username and something, what are the roles, whether they are authenticated or not. So these are the few things which are inside authentication. Now authorization filter gets this security context from security context holder. So it will get the currently authenticated or not authenticated user from the security context. Then it will verify like what the request is trying to access, what it is for, like what is the path, what is the method of the request, and what is the configuration for that method and the path, and whether this authentication satisfies those criteria or not. If it satisfies, then it will allow the request to go through, otherwise it will reject the request. So that is authorization filter. Now who set up this security context and the security context holder? So if you remember, there is form login, there is HTTP basic login. So those are as well filters. So now let's say we have HTTP basic filter. Now what this filter does is this looks for an header called authorization, and its value is base 62 encoded value of username : password. So it looks for authorization. It sees this value. It first decode this back. Then it will get username and password. Then using username and password, it tries to verify whether this username and password are correct or not. If they are correct, then it put that authentication in the security context, and it marks that this is authenticated. And if these are not correct, then it says that okay, request is not authenticated, but it will not reject the request. it will not reject the request, because this can happen that after this filter there is another filter, let's say form login, which has some other mechanism to authenticate the user. And also, even if user is not authenticated, there can be some endpoints which are allowed for everyone, which are allowed for even not authenticated users. So in that case, this filter will not reject the request. It will just verify whether the user is authenticated or not. If authenticated, then it will create a new security context and put it in the security context holder with authenticated or not authenticated variable. But there will always be security context in the security context holder if we have this HTTP basic filter. Now similar thing is done by form login filter as well. This takes the username and password from the form URL encoded parameters of the request or something like that. Now the another thing is how does these filters determine whether the given username and password is correct or not. So for that we have something called user detail service. User detail service. So as you may have seen, we can use multiple user detail service. So for example, for demos we generally use in-memory user detail service, or if you want to store users in the database, then you can use something called DB user manager or something. Sorry, Jdbc user detail manager. So user detail manager is also another interface, user detail manager, and which extends this user detail service interface. So it has few other methods as well. So if you have an instance of user details manager or user detail service, and that is injected in this filter, and using these interfaces, it verifies whether the given username and password are correct or not. If the passwords are correct, then what are the roles and what is the authorities assigned to the user, and it puts all of these in this authentication thing. Now we will do the similar thing here. So what we will do is we will create one filter. So let's say this is our filter, and let's call it token authentication filter. So this filter will be responsible to authenticate the user based on the token in their request. So so what this filter will do is, let's say this is any request, so it will check for an header authorization, and its value should be bearer, and then this will be some token. If it is not there, then it will not authenticate the user basically. And so if this header is not there, then it will not do anything, and it will just send the request to the next filter. So it doesn't need to do anything. It won't reject the request. It will just send the request to the next filter or next servlet. So next filter will be basically authorization filter. So this will be authorization filter. Now let's say we have the token. Now what we will do is we will check in the database whether the token is valid or not. So for that we have this database here. Now we will check whether the token is valid or not. So for that we can have, let's say, one class called token repository, and then we can just check whether the token is valid or not. Now if the token is valid, then we will get back one username. Now we have the username for which the token is, and we also know that the token is valid. Now we need the roles as well of the user, because we need to know what are all the authorities assigned to the user. One thing what we can do is, for our application we can simply assume that they have the role of user. But let's say we want in the future, if we want to scale our application and we want to have multiple types of user, let's say user, admin, or super admin, or something like that. In that case, what we would like to do is we would like to get their roles from the database, and either we can query that directly, or we can use user details service. We can use user details service or user details manager, and we will use Jdbc user details manager because we want to get the user details from the database. So this user details manager will be responsible for getting the details of the user from the database, and in the user details we will get anything, their username, password, their authorities assigned to them, and things like that. Now we will have both things. We will have username, we will have authorities, then we will create one uh, authentication token. So authentication token is interface, by the way. So we will extend the authentication token, and we will create something called token, authentication token, and in this we will put the username, we will put roles or authorities, and we will say that this is authenticated, and we will put this in the, we will create one security context, and we will put this in security context holder. Now what, and then we will pass the request to next filter. Now next filter is authorization filter. So authorization filter will get security context from security context holder, and it will get the security context which we created, and this security context has authenticate this authentication, and this authentication has authenticated true. So this will say that okay, this is authenticated, so it will allow us to send request to this to do and to do's endpoint. So that's how we will do it. Now for registration and login. Now for registration we want no authentication, because if the user is already logged in, only then if he can register, then there won't be any new registration in our application, and no one will be able to register themselves. So for registration, we don't want to have any authentication in place. So in the authorization filter, we can configure that registration should be accessible by everyone. Then another is login. So login is where user will send their email and their password, and we will send back them a token. In that case as well, we don't want any the user to be logged in, because user is obviously not logged in, and we will not log in the user. So we won't create any session token or anything. If the user is logging there using their email and password, we will just verify whether the email and password are correct or not. Now again, we will do this using Jdbc user details manager. So we will Jdbc user details manager can verify whether the user exists with the given email or password or not. If the user exists, then we can just if the user exists, then we will have token repository. So using token repository, we can create one token. We can create expiry date, and we will store this in the token in the database, and we can return this token back. Now how will we do registration? So for the registration, we have email and password as well. So registration, we have email and password. Now this user details manager has another method to create the user. Create user, and we just need to pass the username and their encoded password or password hash. So using that, we can easily create the user details, a new user. So that is the architecture of our system. So in order to register and login, we don't want any authentication in place, and when the user login, we just return the token back. And if user wants to access any endpoint related to Todo, then we want the user to be authenticated, and because user is authenticated, in that case we can get the username of the logged in user, and based on the username we can only work on the to-dos where the owner is the currently logged in user. Let's look at the code. So let's go to dev this one to-do list API, and I will open it in Visual Studio Code. I will straight go to the security configuration. So let's go there, go to infrastructure, security. I will go to web security configuration. Now here you can see we have yeah, let's look here. In the security configuration, we disable CSRF because our API won't be used from the domain, from the same domain, so we need to disable the CSRF. And here you can see we are disabling any authentication for auth, error or error star pages, so that user will be able to see the errors and will be able to register or login if he is not logged in. For all other requests, we want the user to be authenticated. So this is the configuration of the authorization filter. Now we are adding one filter before the authorization filter, and obviously we need to add it before authorization filter. If we add it after authorization filter, then the user won't be logged in and authorization filter will reject the request, and we don't want that. The filter is token authentication filter. We will directly go there. But before that, here you can see we have created a bean of user details manager. So this is Jdbc user details manager, and for password encoder we are using this delegating password encoder, which is the recommended one to use. Now let's go to this authentication filter. This needs one token repository. So this repository is responsible for managing the tokens, creating a new token, storing the token, and looking up the token. Now I will just go to this filter. So this is the filter, and this filter uses two things: both token repository and user details manager, which we inject them using constructor. Now this is the filter. So it has a request, response, and filter chain. The filter, if you want to invoke the if you want to send the request to next filter, you don't know what is the next filter, but filter chain knows that. So if you can just do filter chain dot do filter, so it will call the next filter in the filter chain. First we check if the author header is present or not. If not, then we just call the next filter, because next filter might have the logic to authenticate the user, or even if it doesn't have any filter, then also this request might be permittable by the authorization filter. Now we know that the header present. Now if header is present, then we want the header to be valid. So if header doesn't start with this token prefix, which is nothing but bearer, so if the header's value doesn't start with it, then we send this error. Now the value starts with the bearer. In that case, we get the rest of the value. Now this is our token, and now from the token repository, we find username for the token. So this method will verify whether the token is not expired, and then it will return the username for the token. So this is optional. So we are checking if it is empty. If it is empty, means the token is invalid, and then we return unauthorized here. After that, we have this user. Now we have the username. So we have the username. Now using this user details manager, we can load user by username, and then what we are doing is we are creating a new this authentication token here. I created in one class authentication, this token authentication token. In that we will put the username, this principal, and authenticated will be true, and then these are the authorities, and we will put this in security context, and we will update the security context with this context, and then we will call the next filter in the chain. So this is where the authentication logic is happening for our application. Now let's also look at how we are doing registration and login. For that, I have this auth web controller. Now here we are injecting user detail manager, password encoder, and auth token repository. Now let's look at registration. For registration, we have this registration request payload. This just has email and password. So we will consider email as the username and password here. If there is already a user which we can check using user details manager, then we return an error that user already exists. Otherwise, we create a new user. Now when creating the new user, The password will be the hashed password, which we encode using password encoder, and we are giving this user role to the user, and then we create the user using user details manager. In order to log in, we have username and password from the login request payload, and then first we need to check whether the user exists in the database. So from the user details manager, we load user by username. After that, we check whether the password matches or not. If it matches, then in that case, we create a new token and return that, so that auth token repository handles creating the token part. I want to go into auth token repository, but you can look at there. Now I will show you what we have in the database. So I'm using Flyway here, Flyway data migration tool to create the tables and everything in the database. Now we have this users and authorities tables. This is used by Jdbc user details manager. You can find that here. You go to Jdbc user manager and go here. Yeah. Here you can find the schema, or if you are using Oracle database, then this is the schema which you need to use. Now in this schema it is mentioned varchar ignore case, but in postgres there is no variable type varchar ignore case, so I just use varchar. Then we have this table to store the authentication tokens, which is username token, when it was created, when it will expire. And then we have another table to actually store the to-dos, ID, title, description, completed, owner. Now owner is a foreign key to users table. So that is that's pretty much all. And now you can look at let's say auth token repository as well. So this is the interface, and its implementation is somewhere here only. Security SQL auth token repository. You can find how the auth token repository managing the tokens as well. So that is it for this video. The purpose of this video was to just tell you how you can create your custom authentication filter when you need to create a one, and most of the time you will need to create authentication filter. The nice thing is that you are not limited to authenticate the users using only one way. We can have multiple authentication filters, and each authentication filter can authenticate the users using different ways. Let's say using authorization header, or using HTTP basic, or things like that. So that is it. I hope you found this video to be useful, and please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you everyone. Bye.